Warning: this video is for entertainment purposes only. Please contact your local municipalities as well as a trade professional or general contractor before starting any do-it-yourself project. Hi, I'm Greg, and welcome to Greg's Do-It-Yourself Tech channel. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, great to have you back. As always, please like, subscribe, and share the video with your friends so that people know about our channel and we can continue to make videos to help you out. Today's episode is Voice over IP versus traditional phone lines. This is a topic that comes up a lot with my clients, and I thought it would be great to share it with you guys. People are confused about the differences between traditional phone lines and voice over IP, and even if you're running a small business PBX, some of the terminology seems to confuse people a lot. They get confused on a couple different things that we're going to talk about today. So hopefully you find this educational and will help you out with some of the decisions you have to make on what type of phone lines are good for you for right now and in the future. And just, again, educate you on some of the different terminology out there. Okay, first let's talk about the cables. So there's a couple different ones we have here. Whether it be phone style cable or Ethernet cable, which is used for voice over IP phones. Now, on the screen we talk about a few different ones. We have RJ11 versus RJ12 versus RJ14 versus RJ45. A lot of RJs going on here. As always, when we talked about this in previous videos about terminating cables, RJ stands for registered jack. Now, the numbering is just the registered jacks in the order that they were designed in. So basically the first ones come out, and then they register that number and the type of jack it is, and then they move on to other ones. So there's nothing specific about the numbers. RJ45 versus RJ11 really doesn't designate anything specifically what makes it different. There's nothing hidden in the name that tells you the type of jack it is. It's just the order that they were registered in. Okay, first one, RJ11. Now, before we get too far into this one, let me show you what the first couple we're going to talk about look like. I'm going to zoom in for a moment on this. See if we can get it in close enough to really see this wire. Okay. So if you look over here, there's these little metal, usually copper or gold looking pins on the top of them. This particular one has 4. So I want you to understand for the next couple jacks we talk about the differences between these. You're going to see how many of these pins exist, which means how many wires are inside of these units, and basically why you would use that over a different style one. Okay, again, the first one we're going to talk about is RJ11. Now, inside that one, you would only see 2 pins. It's usually the inner 2 pins there. So, basically, you would just see the 2 copper wires in the middle of that jack. That particular one is, again, 2 conductors. Typically, it's used for a single phone line. The next style one is called RJ14. Now, the jack itself, I should say, the first 3 we're talking about, the 11, the 14, and the 12, are all in the same size piece of plastic. It is exactly the same here. It's got exactly the same amount of pin locations, whether they use them all or not. So the next one we have is RJ14, which is 4 conductors. So you would see 4 of those little gold wires in there. That is typically used for 2 phone lines if you're using a at-home standard telephone, or if you're using a phone system, they call them like a PBX. One could be used, one set of 2 of them could be used for voice. The second would be for data. And when we talk about data in a PBX phone system, that is the information you see on your screen, caller ID, what lines are in use. So when those lights light up to indicate they're red and stuff like that, it's telling you about all those different things across the data. Next is RJ12. And you see these out there. In fact, it's funny. When you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and a lot of electrical places now, they will give you this jack instead of an RJ14. They seem to become more common now. It's a 6 conductor jack. So basically, again, you're going to see six of those little wire leads in there instead of four or two. So with the six conductor, that could be for three phone lines if this was an at-home phone, although that's pretty rare to see phones that do that. Or it's two voice paths and data on a PBX. Now, what does that mean? Two voice paths. Well, you could be on a phone conversation and then somebody else wants to chime in and use your speaker to announce something to you. That needs a voice path. So that would be the other voice path that could be over those wires. Today, more modern phone systems don't do that. There's some other tricks they do to get it all across one set of wires. But that would be one of the more conventional old uses for that would be two voice paths and a data path on a PBX phone system. Next, of course, is RJ45, which we've talked about before, which is an 8-conductor jack. However, it is a bigger looking jack. If I want to compare these two, let's zoom it in here. Oops. You can see that this is the RJ45 over here is much bigger than an RJ14, which is in my other hand. So even though this one has 8 conductors, it is a very different style. Now, you can't put an RJ45 in a jack that's meant for an RJ11, 12, or 14. However, you can put a RJ11, 12, or 14 jack cable can plug into an Ethernet jack. Doesn't mean it's supposed to go there and it will work, but it is something you can do. And frankly, you have to be careful if you plug it into the wrong spot where it doesn't belong. So just don't plug cables in just because they fit. Okay, again, RJ45 typically used for Ethernet, but there are many other things that they do use it for as well. Some companies like to use that jack for connections, whether it be for sound systems or other things, and it really isn't Ethernet. So don't always assume that an RJ45 is going to be used specifically for Ethernet, unless it's something that says it's Ethernet. That's why we always warn people, be careful what you plug into things. Just because it fit doesn't mean it's meant to fit there. Okay, let's talk about some terms. First is POTS lines. Wikipedia defines POTS lines as publicly offered telephone service, or POTS. It's also been called plain old telephone service. So again, it is basic voice grade telephone service. Historically, POTS lines have been delivered by analog signal transmission over copper loops, but the term also describes backwards compatible analog offered by digital phone systems. Copper loop POTS was the standard service offering for telephone companies in the United States from 1867, wow, it's been around for a long time, until 1988, when Integrated Service Digital Network, also known as ISDN, Basic Rate Interface, BRI, was introduced, followed by the development of cellular telephone systems and Voice over IP, or Voice over Internet Protocol, VoIP. Despite the advent of these technologies, copper loop POTS remains a basic form of residential and small business connection to the telephone network in many parts of the world. The term encapsulates the technology that has been available since the introduction of public telephone system in the late 19th century, remaining largely unchanged despite the introduction of innovations such as touch-tone dialing, electronic telephone exchanges, and fiber optic communications into the public switch telephone network, PSTN. It's a lot to take in. Basically, it's your standard phone line. It comes in from the phone company or from the cable company on the back of a cable modem. And basically, you plug your phones right into it, and you do what you need to do. Pretty ordinary. That's why they call it plain old telephone service is the nickname for it. Another term I wanted people to understand because they get a little confused about this is when you have a company and you have multiple phone lines, like let's say you're a small business and you have 3 or 4 phone lines, and you want them to ring. If the first one's busy, it jumps around to the next line, etc., etc. What that is referred to, and phone companies will recognize when you talk to them about it, is called a hunt group. Or in this case, we're going to call it a phone line hunt group because there's more than one type out there. So basically, a hunt group or phone line hunt group is a group of phone lines set up by the phone company so that when one is busy or doesn't answer, the call will go to the next number. Which is great because, again, you want to receive as many calls as you can. The number that is set up to hunt, as we call it, is typically called the pilot number. That would be the main phone number for your business, the number you put on your business cards, typically, that you give out to everybody. Typically, if you direct call any number, if you directly call the phone number for any number other than the pilot number, the hunting action won't happen. And what that means is if you directly call your line 2 or your line 3 and they're busy, it will just give you a busy signal typically. It won't start the hunting process on any number but your main phone number. So as an example here, I say, if your main number is 123-555-1212, and if it's busy, it will call 123-555-1213, and if it's busy, we'll call 123-555-1214. However, if you called 123-555-1213 directly and it's busy, it won't automatically jump to 123-555-1214. This only occurs when you call the main number, which is 123-555-1212. Hope that makes sense to you because people get confused by that a lot. Basically, if you have all these different phone numbers, your main number is, again, the only number where if you call it and it's busy, it will jump to the next number, etc., etc. Okay, here's a term you hear a lot, PBX. Let's again do the Wikipedia definition. A private branch exchange, which is what they call PBX, is a system. Let me say that again. A private branch exchange, PBX system, is a private phone network that helps businesses manage calls. It allows employees to communicate internally and connect with external callers using the public switch telephone network, PSTN, which is, again, just your phone lines. Without a PBX system, every employee would need a separate phone line. But with PBX, calls are routed efficiently, making communication smoother and business operations more organized. The central office lines provide connection to the public switch network, which again is basically just your phone company, whether it's Verizon or AT&T or your local cable company or some other company. And the concentration aspect of a PBX permits them to share use of these lines between all stations in an organization. Its intercommunication ability allows 2 or more stations to directly connect while not using the public switch network. This method reduced the number of lines needed for an organization to the public switch telephone network. Each device is connected to the PBX, such as a phone, a fax machine, or a computer modem, is referred to as an extension. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And has a designated extension telephone number that may or may not be mapped automatically to the numbering plan of the central office and the phone number block allocated to the PBX. I'll explain all that better in a second. So that's a lot to take in for the moment, but let's explain that. Basically, in the early days of phones, if your company had 5, 10 phone lines, every single phone required wiring to handle all of those phone lines. Every phone had every availability. Or even earlier than that, each one would be, so if you had 20 employees, you might need 20 phone lines. It becomes very expensive very fast. And again, so some of the early phone systems too use special wiring like this, so we can finally get this monster out of the way. this is what they call a telco cable. It actually has inside of it 25 pairs of wire. So 50 wires total for 25 phone lines. So basically, a wire that's monstrous like this would be the wire going to your desk. By comparison, here's a regular phone cord for a single phone. Look at the size difference between the two. This is very, very thin. This thing's a monster and it doesn't flex very well. So in order to accommodate the needs of companies, because basically everybody realized if you had, say, for example, 24 employees, 24 people are typically not making calls at the same time. You don't need an individual phone line for each person. So PBX systems came out to allow you to have, first off, calls between each other, because maybe you want an intercom call in between everybody. Well, you don't want to have to take a phone line call out to call back in to speak to somebody. You want to be able to directly communicate without wasting your phone lines. And second, you want to be able to pick up a phone line, whether you want to make an outbound call or somebody calls in, and be able to access that call. So that's where they're basically miniature versions of what the phone company uses, that you can actually have your phone calls at your location and basically jump into whatever you need. A couple more terms I want to talk about, and then we'll get a little deeper into this with some demonstrations on traditional phones, because we're going to finish traditional phones before we go to voice over IP. So a PBX phone line, because people get confused between phone lines and phone extensions all the time. Okay. A PBX phone line is a single line used to make or receive calls, typically considered a single POTS line. So the reality is, like I said, I have clients, for example, that have 6 phone lines, but literally have 24 people there. The confusion they get into is the next thing, which is PBX Phone Extension. If you have a phone on your desk, that is your phone extension. So when I ask some of these companies, how many phone lines do you have? They get confused and they say, I have 24 phone lines. No, you don't. How many actual lines can you press a button and call in and out on? So a phone extension is typically a single phone, like this, assigned to a single user or single office. Maybe you have a human resource office and everybody that's in human resources shares that phone. So it's in that single office is a single phone. That phone is the phone extension, not a phone line. And it's important to understand these terms as we switch into voice over IP to understand the difference as well and somehow how that stuff works. So again, it's just a single reference. It could be each person in your company gets their own phone, or each office gets a phone and the people that do the same role share it. For example, you might have 2 nurses at a school that share one office. They may only have one extension for both of those people. So the extension is dedicated to the job title, not the person. Now let's talk about another term, because this will explain a little more as we go forward of the different things we see out there. It's called key telephone system. Now, PBXs, again, in the past, used to have all these different buttons for all the different lines and stuff like that. So a key telephone systems are primarily, again, this is a Wikipedia definition, key telephone systems are primarily defined by arrangements with the individual line selection buttons for each available telephone line. The earliest systems were known as wiring plans and simply consisted of phones, sets, keys, lamps, and wiring. So let's explain this whole thing about keyed phone systems a little better. And we will use, this is a traditional telephone right here. And let me see if I can zoom this in a little bit here. I am a Panasonic phone system dealer, and even though they don't sell these anymore, I still work on these for quite a few clients out there. So basically, on this side of the phone, let me just grab it right here, are these little buttons. Now, these buttons here light up. They're either not lit, they're green, or they're red, and they can be flashing green or flashing red as well. So those buttons can be used for a bunch of different things. Typically, we do the left side would be phone lines. So again, if your company had 4 phone lines or 12 phone lines, whatever they had, they would be over here. This side we typically use for intercom calling because you want to see the status of other people on your system. Well, the problem is, again, at a system like this, we have all these phone lines and we have, let's say we had 24 people. You can't fit all 24 people here. So everybody traditionally cannot see. If it's a small company with maybe 4 phone lines, 4 to 8 employees, great. We can fit the whole thing on here and you can be on the phone and say, let me check the status of John and see if he can take your call. And you can look at the phone and you'll see, oh, John's on the phone. Can I transfer you to his voicemail and stuff like that? So these key systems basically gave us the ability to see all these different things. Today's PBXs are more what they call hybrid key systems because, again, you don't get to always put all the people on there. You don't see every single instance of phone lines. You don't see every instance of your employees and your other extensions because there's just not enough buttons on the phone. Maybe your operator has what they call a console where they have a bunch of additional buttons, but each individual can't see that. So we might give them just their group of people. You know, again, if it's a really small company, yeah, it works fine. Sometimes the doctor's office as well is small enough to fit. But if it's something big, we don't show everything. Maybe you only see a few of the phone numbers or none at all. You may just see an incoming call group and other things like that. So just want you to understand that, how these things basically work. Because in bigger companies, you don't see all that information, but you might see some of the things you want to see. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in voice over IP as well. So let's talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of these different systems. First off, again, we're talking about traditional phones. So let's start with that. And then we're going to go to voice over IP, and then we'll circle back around and show you the differences of stuff here. So traditional phone lines, pros. Easy to troubleshoot. I can hook up a thing called a butt set or even another phone, usually to the wiring, and hear if the wire's working. Very easy to plug in meters and other things and see what's going on with that type of wiring. So again, very easy to troubleshoot. Easy to split to multiple devices. What I mean by that is on a phone line, I can split that phone line to multiple things. I can make it go to an answering machine. I can make it go to a cordless phone. If it's your home line, it's very easy to put a little Y splitter on there and split off the signal. Can be cabled over long distances easily, sometimes over thousands of feet. I know camps and stuff like that have run wires huge distances between buildings, and they work perfectly fine. Additional pros, excellent sound quality. If you ever had a real old phone company phone and somebody's at a loud building or even a rock concert, you can hear all that sound coming right through the phone. It's like, ooh, that's loud. I got to pull it away from my ear. It's so loud because you hear all the different nuances. They're all right there. And we'll talk about the problems with the opposite, which is voice over IP later on. But if you have a real traditional phone line, you'd be amazed how much sound you can hear through that. Instant communication travels at almost the speed of light. Now, this always gets people. You would think, well, sound should travel at the speed of sound. Yes, but our voices are converted into electrical signals, and electricity moves at almost the speed of light. So the traveling speed of the voice path over electrical systems is almost the speed of light, which is incredible. Nothing can go that fast. Okay, let's talk about the cons. Tends to be the most expensive. Today, a lot of companies are getting tired of supplying old phone lines. So your typical, what they call Ma Bell companies and shoot-offs of those old companies can be well over $100 per phone line sometimes, which is ridiculously expensive in today's market, although not always. Again, the cable company has some offerings that can be cheaper than this. Sometimes I've seen them as in the $50 range or less, sometimes on a promotion. But typically, very expensive phone lines. Another thing that is old pain in the neck with these things is typically each phone line only shows the caller ID for the number and not the company's main number if multiple numbers are involved. So before I gave you an example of phone numbers where it said it was area code 123-555-1212 and then 555-1213, 555-1214. So the problem is if you called out on 555-1214, somebody's going to see on their caller ID that number and call that number back. Well, as I told you before, if they're not calling on the main number, that hunt group's not going to hunt. So they may call that number and it may work. They may call that number and it may give them a busy signal. But you can't make the secondary, like your line 2, line 3, line 4 will only show its actual caller ID. It will not give you the ability to just only show the main number. And it does become a problem. Other times people are afraid to answer a phone call from a number they don't know. So if you're calling your doctor's office and you have the number saved as the main number and one of the secondary numbers calls, you may not answer that phone because you don't know who that is. If it had called from the original caller ID of the doctor's office, you say, oh, it's my doctor's office. I'll answer that call. So in this day and age, caller ID being the main phone number is more and more important than ever. And also, it says here, it can be difficult to transfer calls to outside devices. What that means is, let's say I have a call, and they want to talk to John, who's another one of my employees who's on the road. I can't typically hit transfer, call John's number, hang up the phone, and now the call's gone. I actually have to waste a few phone lines to do what they call a conference call. So I have to conference John in, and then I'm wasting the phone line the person came in on, the phone line I'm calling John out on, and then I either usually have to hold the phone or I have to check in every once in a while to see if they're still there. So I'm wasting a lot of resources just to get a call out to somebody else. I can't just hang up and the call's gone and my lines are returned to normal. All this is being wasted just to call somebody to transfer outside. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule. There are some special phone lines that can handle call transferring, but they're not typical. That's why I'm saying it that way. Okay, voice over IP, the stuff you guys have been wanting to know all about. So, again, starting with Wikipedia's quote, Voice over Internet Protocol, Voice over IP, or VoIP, also known as IP telephony, is a set of technologies used primarily for voice communication sessions over Internet Protocol, IP networks, such as the Internet. VoIP enables voice calls to be transmitted as data packets, facilitating various methods of voice communication, including traditional applications like Skype, Microsoft Teams, Google Voice, voice over IP phones. Regular telephones can also be used for VoIP by connecting them to the Internet via an analog telephone adapter, or ATA, which we'll talk more about in a few moments, which converts traditional telephone signals into digital data packets that can be transmitted over IP networks. The broader terms Internet telephony, broadband telephony, and broadband phone service specifically reference to the delivery of voice and other communications such as fax, SMS, which is text messaging, and voice messaging over the Internet. In contrast to traditional public switch telephone networks, PSTN, commonly known as plain old telephone service, which we've already talked about earlier in this episode. Voice over IP technology has evolved to integrate with mobile telephony, including voice over LTE, which is cellular, and voice over NR, which is voice over 5G cellular. So LTE was what we used to call 4G cell phone service. Now, voice over 5G is 5G cellular service, enabling seamless voice communication over mobile data networks. The advancements have extended voice over IP's role beyond its traditional use in internet-based applications. It has become a key component in modern mobile infrastructure as 4G and 5G networks rely entirely on this technology for voice transmission. What they mean by that is rather than standard analog or digital cell phone signals, now your voice is converted for even 4G and 5G networks. You are voice over IP just because you're using a cell phone that's LTE or 5G. So it's another form of using the same type of information. You're converting to voice over IP right then and there. Okay, they talked earlier about a thing called an analog telephone adapter, or ATA. Again, Wikipedia's definition is an analog telephone adapter, ATA, or FXS gateway, is a device for connecting traditional analog telephones, fax machines, and similar customer premise devices to a digital phone system or a voice over IP telephone network. So what I mean by that is, or what they mean by that is, let's pretend this is just a regular phone. It's not. This is a digital business phone, and I'll explain the difference in a moment here. But let's say this was a regular cheap $20 phone from Walmart, or let's say you prefer, some old cordless phone or something like that, but you want to use it over voice over IP. Basically, you get this adapter that looks like a box that has an Ethernet jack, probably a power jack on it, and then it has a phone jack on it. And then you would take your phone plug it in there, and you would get dial tone as if this was plugged into a phone line. The first great example of those is Magic Jack. Magic Jack is absolutely an ATA box. So if you ever played with Magic Jack, you understand the technology. It pretends to be a regular phone line. You plug your doohickeys in, and boom, you get phone service, which is great. Okay, let's talk about what a voice over IP phone line. So typically, because again, before we talked about PBX phone lines and POTS phone lines. So on voice over IP, if it's a voice over IP phone line, it typically comes from a cable modem or an ATA box, which again can be connected to a single line phone, or it can also be used if you have a nice phone system like a small PBX at your business, and you want to keep that even though you want to go to a voice over IP service. It's a neat way to continue to use that. So let's say you got Magic Jack, for example. You could buy 4 Magic Jacks and replace your 4 phone lines on your phone system with 4 Magic Jacks. I'm not even sure Magic Jack's around anymore. I haven't even heard about them in years, but a lot of people who have used them in the past, it's a great concept to understand what I'm talking about. So basically, you got a little box, you plug the phone line in, you plug it in as if it was coming from the phone company, and boom, you have that service again. Now, let's talk about the other thing. So beforehand, we talked about a PBX extension. Now we're going to talk about a voice over IP user, because a lot of their services out there don't talk about extensions anymore. Before I said you had a nurse, for example, right? Now, instead of having a nurse or a nurse's office having a single extension, they more are concerned with how many people you have. So each user is considered similar to an extension, and sometimes we can trick the systems, but basically in voice over IP you have a user. Now, this is my own definition. Is basically a voice over IP user is all devices associated with a single user. It can be a physical phone, which is like this is a voice over IP phone right here, and I'll show you the difference between these two in a little bit. It can be an app on your smartphone. So your phone can have a special app that also acts as part of this voice over IP user's account. It can also be a software loaded on your computer, or it can be a combination of all. It says they can be set to ring at the same time, or they can roam depending on the configuration. And what I mean by that is when somebody's calling looking for Greg, and they, whether they call the switchboard and the operator transfer the call to Greg, or it's dial by name directory, or they know my extension. Once it calls me, it can potentially call all those devices I have turned on. So if the app is loaded on my phone and it's logged in, it's going to ring on there. If I have a physical desk, it may simultaneously ring there. It may ring all of my devices at the same time, or it may roam. And what roam means is if I am away from my desk, maybe it's got geo tagging so that it knows if I'm not at home or I'm not at the office, now I'm only going to check, or I'm only going to be able to log in on my cell phone device or other devices like that. So there are many different combinations, but they like to treat that as a user instead of being, okay, well, here's a nurse's office, and one nurse has this device, one has another. They typically treat it as a user. So each person gets their own email address. Each person has all their devices, and that's how we find that person in a business based on all those devices. So there are differences. Some companies actually do allow for, what's the word I want to say, like traditional extensions over voice over IP, but a lot of them count more as a user. I just want to treat a user and every device you have. So if I have two phones, one at my desk, one at home, and I have a smartphone app and stuff like that, rather than charging you for each of those devices, I charge per user, and that one user can be as many devices, but it's only for that one person to use. You can't use, for example, if somebody was home and they picked up the phone, somebody at the office can't pick up the same phone if it's assigned to the same user. They would clash, and the call would jump to the other person. So one user, multiple devices all combo together as that user. Let's see here. So before we go into the pros and cons of this, I figured let me give you a quick demonstration because I don't want to get too sidetracked. So again, talking about Panasonic, for example, this is a traditional phone. It has, as you can see, a traditional wire inside of it. In the old days, what Panasonic did, before they stopped selling phones, this is an Ethernet version. So as you can see, grab this Ethernet cable here. This has a standard Ethernet cable that plugs in the bottom of this phone. Let's see if we can get it in there. Yep. There it goes, click. So these two phones look basically the same. And for a while there, they were trying to make these phones be the same. You can see, again, we have all the same type of buttons on the side. Both of them have 24 buttons that can be assigned extensions and other things. So, again, they're trying to do the same thing that was done in the past, but just doing it a little different over the internet instead. Okay, let's talk about pros. They tend to be very inexpensive, although the price can add up if it's per user. So, let's say we did the example before of a company that's got 12 phone lines versus 24 extensions. So the 12 phone lines at $100 each would be $1,200, which is a lot of money. Now, you can knock those down to, say, $19.95 per phone line. Now you're talking a lot cheaper. So let's see. $19.95 phone line times 12. That'd be $234. Now you're talking versus $1,200. The problem is if you're going per extension, each extension at $19.95. So let's say they had 24 people, right? So each person's per user. So 24 times $19.95 is $478.80 versus, let's say, 12 phone lines again times $19.95. So versus $239.40 for the phone lines. So it can add up if it's per user. So again, for lines, cheaper, but you got to weigh how many, your cost per user and stuff like that as well. Devices can be taken anywhere with internet access and be used with very little reconfiguring. Typically, you just plug it in, or if you need Wi-Fi, you may have to configure the phone to the new Wi-Fi and put in the password and stuff, probably for the first time only. So you take your phone home, you reconfigure the Wi-Fi. When you go back to work, it might remember that Wi-Fi automatically. You might have to keep switching, reprogramming it. But either way, a little reconfiguring, you're back up and running. Typically, it could show caller ID of the company instead of just the device. So most of these phones, even if they have their own individual phone number, if I'm using voice over IP, I can typically show the company's main number instead, so that every time I call somebody, they'll see the company number and recognize that instead of an extension number assigned just to me. There may be a phone number assigned to me, but I can say, nope, I want to give the main number so that every call reroutes to the operator. And before we go into the cons, I should also indicate that they can also transfer calls to outside devices very easily. That was the thing we talked about before as a con with regular traditional phone lines. I can take a phone call that I'm talking to somebody and transfer that call, just dial the phone number of the other person. Hey, here's a call for you. Hang up. And now that call's gone. I'm not monitoring that call. It's not taking up my phone lines anymore. Another quick thing that I think is important to understand is with voice over IP, we're not really seeing traditional phone lines most of the time, especially if you're doing a voice over IP PBX. You're seeing instances of calls to you as a user. So you might have 3 calls that you're talking to or put on hold for just you. You're not seeing the lines like we did with the old phone system here, where you would see line 1, line 2, line 3, etc. A lot of these new cloud PBXs, as they call them, it's just how many calls are you taking at a time. So if I'm buying per user, I could take 3 calls. The next person could take 3 calls. We could have 100 calls between 24 people, and we're not paying for each of those lines. We're just paying per user. So it gets confusing. If people want me to dive further into what cloud PBXs are for voice over IP and stuff like that, I can definitely do another episode to explain some of that stuff a little better. But basically, like I said, you have multiple calls, but when you hang up that call, you transfer that call, you're not taking up a physical phone line you never did in the first place. It's a little confusing behind the scenes, but again, they are excellent at transferring calls to external devices. So it's not just, hey, I'll put a call through to another person who's another extension here. If they're external, I can bounce that call to anybody, even if they're not part of the company, very easily with voice over IP, typically. There are some exceptions, but typically that can be done. So the cons of voice over IP: latency. We're going to spend a little time on this in a few moments, but latency is a big one. I'll give you a definition and explanation in a few moments. Next, requires hardwire or Wi-Fi at the location of the devices. So you want to add an IP phone to your setup. Well, if you don't have internet in the area you want it, or you don't have a physical hardwired Ethernet, it's not going to work. You're going to have to run some new cabling. Another thing, requires either power or basically you need to have a power plug in handy, or it needs what they call a PoE, which stands for Power over Ethernet switch. So basically, and I talked a little bit about PoE switches on my video about security. This phone here only has a hookup for Ethernet. That's it. So this has to be plugged into a PoE switch, and that's the only way that phone will work. Now, I brought another example of a smaller phone. This is a company called Fanville makes this phone, and this particular one's with a company called Intermedia. But on the back of the phone, let me see if we can zoom it in here a little bit. Let's see if you guys can see this over here. Might be a little too dark for it. Oh, there we go. So basically we have Ethernet jacks over here, in and out. So if you have only a computer connection, we can plug into that old connection and then tie the computer into the back of the phone. And then we have a power cord here. So let's zoom back out again. And this particular phone has the ability to plug in. So if you don't have a power over Ethernet switch, you can plug the phone in and plug the power in. But again, now you require power. Typically, this is, again, your old phone system. These old systems, PBXs, actually powered the phone. So when that wire was plugged in, it actually tapped power and powered the phone. So if you had a traditional PBX in your office before, you might not have even needed to power up your phones. Now you have each of these locations where you either need to get a PoE switch and upgrade some of your network infrastructure, or you're suddenly going to have to plug in a device that you've never had to plug in before because your phone never needed a plug before. So this is all considerations when you switch over. All right, another con is it cannot, and I emphasize cannot, use existing phone wires unless they're at least Cat5 cable, and even then it may require modification. What I mean by that is if those wires were going to a special phone switch or phone blocks, we have to cut the ends off of those and then put in standard Ethernet connectors. If it's older, it may be Cat3. It may be older style phone wires even more, which were the ones that had multicolors. They were red, green, black, and yellow. Those wires aren't even twisted pairs at all. You cannot run Ethernet off those wires. So if you assume you can just rip out your existing phone system, if you have a phone system, and swap it for voice over IP, you may be running into a big problem because you can't. So these are all things you need to factor into getting this. And this is why I always recommend getting a professional like myself involved to scope out your network and figure out the pros and cons. If you're just going to say, hey, I had a phone here, I'm going to swap it out for voice over IP, you might be in for a big surprise and a way bigger expense and headache than you could possibly imagine. Another thing we talk about is sound quality is not the greatest. So, because there's so much information going over the internet and it all requires data, to make the data better, just like photos used to be huge. They use a thing called compression to reduce the size of what the information is so that it can be sent with less usage across the internet. The problem is because it's basically just a standard phone conversation. We're not trying to get super high quality. So they have figured out that basically speaking is from this range to this range of words. As long as I'm speaking in this range, it doesn't matter. You might have noticed with your newer cell phones too, if you're at a concert, people can't hear it on the other end of the phone call. Used to be able to with regular phones and even earlier cell phones. If somebody gets loud and starts screaming, it clips. It can't handle that because it's very narrow in what it's actually trying to listen to and transmit. And as I say here, it can clip and cut off loud noises or higher frequencies. You could be at a place playing, you hear a piano behind you, and all of a sudden notes just die out because it can't handle those higher frequencies. Again, not the end of the world, but it does affect the quality. So it's, it's part of the equation, just to be aware. It's not as good, even though they could do it if they really wanted to. They've compressed it. They've only dealt with certain frequencies because they don't want to take up too much data off the internet. Okay, this is the big headache with voice over IP. And it's hit or miss. Every company is different. But we're going to spend some time on this because you've probably experienced this problem before. Latency, basically my definition of it, the delay in the time data goes from your device to the internet or comes back from the internet to your device. The larger the number, the longer the delay. If they talk about, for example, there's websites that can test latency. 200 milliseconds, or 200 ms, as I say, is larger than 100 ms. The larger the number, the more the latency. Which, again, I said here is typically measured in milliseconds. So, again, 200 milliseconds is larger than 100 milliseconds. So this is a big area we're going to spend a few minutes talking about because this is the number one headache I don't like about voice over IP. When we talked about traditional phones, we said it goes at basically the speed of light. Almost the speed of light. And what that means is, let's say I made a call to California. So I'm in one state. My state connects to a backbone that goes across the whole country and then connects to California's switch, and then California directs to me. Once all those connections are established, and they happen rather quickly, from that moment on, our conversation is basically instantaneous. The second I say something, the other person hears it, and vice versa. Now, starting with cell phones, if you've ever stood next to somebody you're talking to on a cell phone, you might be saying, test, and a little bit later, test, you'll hear almost like an echo. The problem with voice over IP is voice over IP is going over the internet, and it's not a direct route. Where, like I said before, my state jumps to the backbone, jumps to California, jumps to that person I'm talking to. Some companies, for example, one voice over IP company I used to deal with that's no longer around, used to bounce the calls from America to Ireland and then back again. And a lot of these companies are bouncing all over the world to their locations, and you don't have the ability to know these. All you know is your call is connected, but there is a delay. And you don't hear the delay from each other because you're not standing next to the person. If you and the other person are standing next to each other, a lot of times that delay is somewhere around a second, believe it or not. And, the reason I say that is because it may take 300-400 milliseconds if it's really laggy for your information to get out to the internet. Well, then it hits the other side and still has to be bounced back to the other person, which takes some time. And the way this works is, I don't know if you've ever called somebody and you're speaking to them and you constantly interrupt each other, especially during a pause. If I say a few things, blah, 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 and I pause, now I might be saying something else, or the other person might hear that pause and think, hey, it's okay, I can now start talking. But the problem is, I pause. Now a second has gone by. The other person hears that second, and they say, oh, here's a pause, but now I've already started talking again. The problem is, I start talking a little bit, they don't hear that, and there's a delay. And once you get good at understanding about this, you basically get, I'm on one of these laggy, high latency calls. And like I said, some are almost instant. They're very similar to regular phone calls. Some are extremely delayed. And if you keep bumping into that other person and trying to talk, especially during pauses, or you say, here's my question to you, and then you're waiting, and suddenly they respond, they're not being slow. They haven't even heard you yet. So that is one of the big problems with voice over IP. And again, if you're dealing with one company's voice over IP and it's slow, and they're on another one and theirs is slow, it gets bad. Unfortunately, it's the way the world's moving. A lot of companies are trying to go into this voice over IP world. And I mean, I've called companies like Dell or Verizon and other companies like that, and just talking to customer service, it's clear as bell that person is way delayed on my call. Once you understand that, the best thing to do is just pause. Or if you bump into them when they start talking and you start talking, you can say, listen, can I just speak? And you wait a second before, and you wait for them to say, sure. Or you might say, no, you go ahead, and then you wait until they respond before you make your next move. Once you're talking for a little bit, it's fine. It'll, just keep going. The problem is it's those moments where you're interacting and you need an answer, or you need to know, hey, it's a good moment for me to start talking again. And that's where the problem is because, again, the delay just jams you up. I don't know, down the road, maybe as a speed things up and do other things, this might get better, but it is the most frustrating thing. I tell clients all the time when they want to go to voice over IP, I said, hey, here's what you might experience. The problem is, even if they don't switch, the places they call might have already switched, so they're still going to deal with this anyway. Even the phone companies now, instead of dealing with their own stuff, they're bouncing off of voice over over the internet, rather than using their own satellites and other things, because sometimes it saves them money. Hey, if you have Wi-Fi enabled, your phone call may not be going out over 5G. It might just jump over your internet, and you're basically saving them the cost of jamming up their cell towers, because now you're just using the internet for phone calls. So all these things affect your call quality and the amount of time that it takes to make a call. Now, if these are subjects you like, again, because we're basically done with this particular video, if you want to dive deeper into this stuff and you want more, please just add to your comments. Because again, like I said, if you like this video, we'd love for you to like it, subscribe, and share, but we'd also like to hear your comments on this. Typically, the videos that I'm posting now are for all audiences, meaning I'm not diving super deep into things. I'm just talking about terms that people want to hear or confused about. Like I hear customers all the time getting phone lines and phone extensions confused. So I am bringing these things up now to educate people. But maybe you want to get deeper into this stuff. There's tons of other terminology I'm not talking about, like quality of service, um, some of the stuff about cloud PBXs and stuff like that. I'm just giving you a broad general term. If you say, hey, this is a subject we'd love for you to give us more information on, please put in the comments, hey, Greg, can you give me more deeper information? I want to dive deeper. Because I can do beginner classes, I can do intermediate, I can do expert level videos, but I need to know who's watching and what they want. So please give me your comments, like these videos, share them with your friends, because again, the more subscribers we have, the more ability we have to make more videos. We have some great plans for some additional videos soon, but I'd love to know what you guys want to see, you guys and girls and everybody. I apologize for saying it that way, but basically, I'd love to know what everybody would like to see out there. So please, give me your comments and let me know, and we'll make a lot more videos for you. Again, all the information on our products, especially if the videos include tools and other accessories and stuff like that, check out our website. We do include all sorts of information about those things as well. Maybe we'll put some links into some good voice over IP services that we deal with, and we can help you with recommendations and other things. But again, check out our website. Again, it's www.gregsdiytech.com. And again, just, keep tuning in. We got plenty more to show you guys. We have plenty more to show you. Have a great day.